thanks a lot. And let's hear from the creative Lora. Ebony, let's hear from Ebony.
I want to thank Jeremy for having me here. It's always good to be back here and with you all, seeing everybody building. It's always great energy. And today, Jeremy initially actually asked me to, hey, Edward, can you tell us about how to best use Lora? So today I'm not going to pretend that I actually know how to use Lora better than any of you guys. I might be the first person ever to have used Lora and have chosen some of the initial hyperparameters that some people somehow, for some reason, are still using today. But I think a lot of you at this point have much more experience than me actually using Lora. And I'm an AI researcher. For those of you who are seeing me for the first time, I started doing research about 7 years ago when I was an undergrad, and then went to Microsoft Research, went to Montreal for my PhD, and most recently I was a researcher at OpenAI. And as a researcher, I'm irredeemably promiscuous. And I like to work on a project for 2 years, and then jump to a completely different project and make some progress there and change to something else. So I started in paraphrasing, and then worked on adversarial examples, then adapting large language models, theories of deep learning, and most recently reasoning. So I haven't actually been thinking about the science and the follow-ups for Lora for a while, but today I hope to achieve 3 things. So I love to, because we're gonna spend some time using Lora today, I'd love to just entertain you guys with a story of how we came up with the technique, how it came to be what it is today. And also just for some of you, maybe hopefully I'll deepen your technical understanding a little bit. There could be some cool ideas that didn't cross your mind before. And finally, I'd like to share with you some of the lessons I learned having created this technology that is a lot bigger today than I expected. So I'm gonna take you first back in time, about a year ago. So I was in Montreal doing my PhD with Joshua Bengio, and the focus was on reasoning. So it was like reasoning was my bread and butter. And then I got an email from someone basically telling me, hey, you suck because Lora is a different thing in CS, and that's very confusing. And kind of came out of nowhere. I was like, okay, well, I told him, okay, I understand that. Like, hopefully, it's not too confusing. And then it turns out it's not just one person. There's actually a whole group who is demanding the same thing. That is, it's very confusing. Please change the name. And that's when I realized last year, this repo that I created for the paper, I wrote actually back in 2021, was on the front page of Hacker News. And I think a lot of you here, that might be the first time you've heard of Lora earlier last year, but actually Lora was a paper that I wrote with my co-authors back in 2021 when I was a researcher at Microsoft Research. So here, I'm gonna take you guys back to when it was first created. It was back in 2021, just forever ago, when GPT-3 just came out and Microsoft and OpenAI started doing this collaboration. And I was on the team at Microsoft that actually interfaced with OpenAI, and we were able to get our hands on GPT-3 before anybody else. And we saw the potential of it, but also we saw the need really for this model to be fine-tuned for it to actually achieve good performance. And at the time, there were 2 mainstream approaches for fine-tuning models. One is called adapter. Adapter tuning came out back in 2019. I don't know if anyone remembers this. And also there is prefix tuning. Anybody here has heard of prefix tuning or have used it? Okay, a few of you. So these were the dominant approaches at the time when you have a large language model, but you don't want to fully fine-tune. So we started there, and it turns out they all have their shortcomings. For example, adapter tuning, you can still use it today. However, and it's very performant because you can just make your adapter really big. However, the problem is you're effectively adding new layers into your existing network. And then if you have a 120 layer transformer, in a way you are making it 240 layers. And for latency sensitive applications, that's pretty bad. For prefix tuning, it's super cheap. However, the performance is simply not there. As you scale up the number of special tokens, the prefix tokens, you're actually not getting monotonically better performance. So we're like, okay, we need a better solution. We have this model that nobody else has. We gotta try we gotta invent something new here for the particular use case we had within Microsoft. And turned out that became a use case that all of us have now, but we were lucky to have had it a few years ago. And the breakthrough came when we had a realization, okay, what if what prefix tuning was doing was just modifying the weights in a low-ranked way? And here you have two prefixes, and what if that actually, because those prefix tokens are 1D vectors as opposed to 2D matrices, what if that's actually corresponding to a direction, like a singular, corresponding to a singular value? So that's kind of the theoretical motivation there, and we tested it. It's super straightforward to implement, and it just worked. So today, when I explain to people what Lora is, I like to use this following framework. So Lora actually generalizes fine-tuning by asking two questions. And here I have a generic-looking neural network. And Lora first asks, okay, do I actually need to adapt all of the parameters? Here I have my attention layer, I have my MLP layer. What if I can just get away with attention? Or maybe just the biases. Anyway, that's the first question to ask. Second is, how expensive do these updates need to be? Say I have, so all of these parameters for the most part are dense matrices. Do I actually need to update the whole dense matrix, or I can just update a simplified version of it? And there are many ways to simplify it, and low rank decomposition is one that kind of strikes the balance of simplicity and expressivity. And once you have these two questions, what you have now is actually two axes on a 2D plane. So here you have on the x-axis, are you adapting the entire weight? Meaning here full rank updates if you choose rank as a dimension of reduction, or you can go all the way to the left, which is you don't do any updates at all. And then any point along the line would be a particular rank. And then on the y-axis, you have the first question, which is, do we update all the parameters or just a subset? And Lora, full fine-tuning is all the way in the corner. You update all the parameters with the entire matrix, so it's full rank. So Lora is actually this entire plane. It's the entire 2D plane. You can have points outside of the plane, but it doesn't make much sense empirically. And what the real breakthrough of the paper, in my opinion, is not that, hey, you can do this. It's pretty obvious. But what wasn't obvious was, turns out you can actually take a point super close to the origin, which is much cheaper for GPU3 175B variant. It was up to 10,000 times cheaper in terms of number of parameters, and hence the storage overhead. And that works. And that wasn't a given. But also what's really cool, if you have this framework, is if it doesn't work, all you gotta do is to move towards this guy, because if this guy works, as you move closer to this corner, it's gonna work at some point. But more often than not, it works in this region. So in practice, this is the initial result that was in the paper. For full fine-tuning on GPT-3, the largest variant, you gotta have almost 100 U100s to start training, whereas if you have Lora, you cut it down to less than a third. And then the checkpoint sizes become much smaller. And you can see this for diffusion models, video models as well. And before it might take a minute to switch models, but now it just takes seconds. And these benefits, turns out it's not limited to language models. Part of it is because for diffusion models and other domains, we're still using transformers. So this makes Lora very generalizable, but actually the core idea of Lora, as long as you're doing matrix multiplication, as long as you're doing not even just fully connected layers, even for convolutional layers, you can enroll them into block matrices. As long as you have matrices, you can do Lora, because you can lower the rank of that matrix when you adapt them. So next up, I'm going to talk about some cool properties of Lora that we thought of at the time, and many of them has been implemented in various instantiation, but some of them might be new to you. Number one is that Lora has this option to completely eliminate latency, and the way you do it is because you're not actually modifying the architecture. You're just saying that the update to a particular weight matrix is now going to be decomposed. So if you don't care about batching, what you can do is actually multiply out the update. So you have those two small matrices, you expand them out into the full matrix, add it back to the full matrix of the original weight, and then you're done. You're just doing inference pass as usual, literally guaranteed no latency. And by the time when you need to switch to a different module, you do the reverse operation and subtract. There are some precision issues you need to be careful about, but this is an option that's not available to something like Adapter. And like Jeremy mentioned before, you can use Lora in batch mode for both training and inference, super efficient. And also now, because the module is so small, you can cache a lot of them in RAM, and therefore eliminate a lot of the latency when you have to retrieve a model from disk. And finally, this is something I thought was super cool at the time when I came up with the idea back in 2021. I haven't seen a great implementation of it. Maybe in some big companies they have, which is you can have a hierarchy of Lora models. You start with a larger rank for something maybe you're adapting to a particular language, and then different domains, and then different applications, and then maybe specific organizations and even specific users. Now we need to switch models, you need to traverse the tree without having to go from the root in the beginning, especially when you have a lot of depth. So finally, I want to share with you guys what I've learned having created this and having seen it grow. And I started doing research in academia. When I was at MSR, it was still very, my mindset was still very academic. And for a while, I didn't even think that this paper, Lora, was going to be a publishable paper because the idea was just so simple. And my lesson there is that academia doesn't always award the right trade-off in terms of simplicity and usability. And Lora, in fact, when it was first submitted to a conference, it was rejected because it was too obvious, too simple. And later, we argued that it's actually, the result is very surprising, adding more experiments, and it got in as a poster. And it was only a few years later people realized the impact. So academia, and I think there's more reason to why some of the groundbreaking research in recent years didn't come out of academia other than the compute constraint. Lesson number 2 is that I think what I learned from having built Lora is just the power of enabling people to create more. At the time when I was at Microsoft, I had 2 projects at the same time. One is Lora, the other is better hyperparameter tuning for huge models using theories of deep learning. And I actually had a favorite paper, and it was the second one. And my manager was telling me, well, I think Lora is actually going to be a much bigger deal. And he was very much correct. And I think both papers enabled a lot of really cool applications, but Lora really empowered a lot of people, and communities came out of it, and we're all here as a community, and I think never underestimate the power of that. And the third lesson is probably the most important one, which is before you name anything, Google it first. Happy hacking, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for talking over. 2 questions, I'll get to the point. Number 1, maybe this is really naive and just making explicit, maybe something assumed. Low rank decomposition, is it really just like if you had represented in matrix A, just like U, left multiple matrix called U and U transpose to like project A onto a smaller rank? Oh.
Yeah, I think you got the intuition right.
Okay.
Yeah, so like your for any matrices, you can do singular value decomposition.
Yeah.
And then if you throw away some of the singular values that are on the smaller side, you get an approximation to the original matrix.
Wow. Okay.
And there are many ways to understand it. It's like
yeah, exactly.
Back to undergrad linear algebra.
Yeah.
So it's
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And to like your paper, and has most of your work been focused on Lora's onto LLMs? And today's hackathon is like text and image. Do you have any work experience with text and image, and if you did, insights?
Yeah, I think what happened back then was the image models in 2021 just didn't really work. And also there weren't as many big image models. So Lora only makes sense, and you see the most benefit when the model is really, really big. And today diffusion models are like that. In terms of tips for making it work better for image models, I'll defer to our other speakers, and I'm sure there are a lot of experienced people who have tinkered with it a lot more than I did.
So I'm curious about this more abstract concept of controllable image generation. How broad do you think Lora or techniques expanded on could become? So for example, like ControlNet, could it be implemented via Lora styles? Is that, or IB Lora is another great example, like you want to target particular subsets of a person's face or of the kind of images that you're dealing with. How do you implement that targeting via Lora? And I guess final, perhaps more general question is, say you want to do multi-Lora or like merge many Loras, is there like a single process that you think would be efficient that would accomplish that instead of some complex pipeline that turns up a Lora?
Yeah. I think that on the question of how do I see like Lora being applied to like these different, being combined with these different controllable generation techniques, I think what's interesting about Lora is like what I said earlier, it's so general where whenever you have a matrix and you're like using that matrix as a linear operator, you can in principle apply Lora. So therefore, all of the techniques we talked about before, adapter, prefix tuning, and I think there are many other ways nowadays people can adapt a model. You can all actually combine them with Lora. We have a control net. Parameters of the control net are matrices, and you just combine them. And to me, it's almost like Lora is this really low-level operator that you can apply to any applications. And then what people build on top of it, it's almost, there's this separation of concern. So I'd say it's almost agnostic, and Lora will just be a tool in the tool belt. In your tool belt, where whenever you have a chance to adapt something with a lot of parameters, you should be asking the question, okay, do I need to adapt all the parameters? And for those parameters, do I need to adapt with full specificity? Can I do it in a low rank way? And the last question you had was
like multi-Lora,
multi-Lora.
multi-seed compositions of Loras.
Right, composition of Loras.
Yeah.
So I think there's a right way to do it, and there's definitely a wrong way to do it. And I think a lot of people were doing it definitely the wrong way, which is you have 10 different Lora modules according with different attributes. So Jeremy was telling me there's face Lora, background Lora, and yesterday I learned that apparently there are feet Lora as well. That's I mean, you have all of these different styles that are not conflicting, and you want to combine them. And the wrong way to do it would be to take the Lora parameters and add them up. And I wish I have a whiteboard here, but the math doesn't work out because you have cross terms that shouldn't be there. Better way to do it would be you have you batch the 10 together, and then as the input goes through these 10 modules, and then you kind of process them separately. So there you minimize the cross term. So you kind of it's more close. It's more close to as if you are just using Loras individually. In practice, I think that should help. As a researcher, I think it makes more sense in principle. Whether it helps in practice and what's the best practice,
Is that a published research result that we can pull from GitHub, or are you suggesting we build that?
I'm suggesting you guys can give it a try. To me, it's very obvious that the way that people were using it before.
And if you want to hang out and implement it, feel free.
Sounds great.
Oh, sure. So,
yeah, are you familiar with Matryoshka embeddings?
What embeddings?
Matryoshka embeddings?
I'm not.
Okay, well, then.
All right.
There's this, I do think that you have a lot of similarities with what Aditya's work is on Matryoshka embeddings, and I wanted to compare and contrast.
Is that like the Russian doll?
No, that's the Russian doll one. So like basically kind of ordering the weights so that you don't have to do any rank annotation. You can just slice the last few weights that you don't want, and makes it more efficient. But it's a similar philosophy without the linear algebra that you do.
Yeah, I've heard of like similar lines of work. Like it's actually, I read this paper that's super cool, which is if you actually take a trained model and you decompose the weights in some of the later layers, and then you throw away some of those smaller singular directions. It actually makes the model perform better. I don't know if it's the same paper. Maybe
It's
not.
a good generalization in regularization.
Yeah, but I think it's a little different, as in, or at least for that line of work, it's given a model, how do you actually throw away some of the directions for efficiency gain? Whereas here is during training,
Yeah,
do we need to
it's a
train?
fine-tune. Yeah.
okay. let's hear it for Edward Him.